It was the perfect murderer without evidence, because there was no murder ever happened. How can it be? 10 persons tasted the same wine from the same bottle. 9 of them tasted delicious wine, but the 10th tasted death. How can you find a killer when the victim's own autopsy says he died of natural causes? This was the question that turned over and over in the mind of Arthur Gray. It was a smooth gray stone of a question polished by the constant gentle tide of his thoughts. He held the report in his hands, though he no longer needed to read it. The pages were cheap, thin paper, the type used by the local pizzeria in the rural Tuscan district. The findings were stark. Marcus Vane, 62 years old, severe coronary thrombosis, a massive fatal heart attack. Case closed, natural causes, but natural causes did not explain the email Arthur had received from Vane's daughter, an email sent from a London law firm, frantic and cold all at once. My father was difficult, Mr. Gray. He was arrogant and he made enemies, but he was not unhealthy. He swam 50 lengths every morning. He did not just die, they killed him and they are getting away with it. So Arthur Gray had come. He was not a policeman, not anymore. He was a consultant, a man who specialized in the quiet rustle of things left unsaid, in the shadows that lingered after the official lights were turned off. He was expensive and he was discreet. His presence was a soft, methodical hum, easily lost in the background noise of life. His small rented car, a dark Lancia, had climbed the Cypress Line road to the Villa Royal as the autumn fog was settling in. The hills, usually a vibrant tapestry of olive green and burnt sienna, were muted, as if a watercolor brush had washed over them with too much water. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of wet stone, fermenting grapes, and something ancient. The villa itself loomed from the mist, not as a fortress, but as a sleeping giant of pale stone and terracotta tile. It had stood here for 4 centuries. It had seen plagues, wars, and the quiet turning of the seasons. It was not impressed by a single sudden death. He was met at the heavy oak door, not by a servant, but by the owner herself, Contessa Isabella Rawle. She was a woman who seemed carved from the same pale, cool marble as her ancestors' statues in the hallway. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her eyes, the color of dark honey, held no welcome, only a weary resignation. She was perhaps in her late 50s, but possessed the stillness of someone much older. "Mr. Gray," she said. Her voice was low, the English perfect, accented only by the music of Italian. "I received your message. I must tell you, you have come a very long way for nothing. It was a tragedy, a medical event. The police are satisfied." "I'm not the police, Contessa," Arthur said, his own voice just as quiet, a counter-melody to hers. "I'm here to offer clarity to Mr. Vanehain's daughter, to close the book for her so she may grieve." The contestant studied him. She saw a man in a rumpled linen suit, gray at the temples with eyes that matched the fog outside. He did not look threatening. He looked, she thought, tired. Clarity, she repeated, the word tasting strange to her. A very noble pursuit. Very well, I have nothing to hide. The tragedy occurred. The police came. They left. We are now in mourning. Where would you like to begin? The tasting room, Arthur said, if you please, the cantina. She nodded, a single sharp movement, and led the way. They did not speak. The only sound was the soft echo of their footsteps on the stone floors, a rhythm that seemed to sync with the slow drip of water somewhere deep within the villa's plumbing. She led him down a spiral staircase, the air growing cooler, the scent of damp earth and wine becoming thick, almost tangible. It clung to his coat. The cantina was less a room and more a crypt, a long vaulted cavern of stone lined with massive sleeping barrels of oak. The air was still heavy and cold. A single long table of dark polished wood dominated the center of the room. At the far end, 10 high-backed chairs were arranged, and on the table, 10 crystal wine glasses stood in a precise line, like soldiers frozen at attention. "You haven't touched anything," Arthur observed, his voice hushed, instinctively respecting the tomb-like silence. "The carabinieri told us not to," the contestant said, standing by the doorway, her arms crossed. She would not step further into the room. "They took photographs. They spoke to us all. Then when the autopsy report arrived, they said it was no longer a matter for them. They told me I could clean, but I have not." "Who was here?" Arthur asked, walking slowly towards the table. His shoes made no sound on the packed earth floor. "Myself, my head sommelier, Luca Bay, and the 8 guests, including Mr. Vane. 10 people in the room. 10 people tasting," she corrected, her voice sharp. "Luca, my sommelier." He tasted the wine first, of course, to check for imperfections from a separate glass. Then he served the guests, 10 guests. 11 people tasted the wine. Arthur stopped. This changed the equation. "And the sommelier Luca, he as well?" He is devastated. He believes he is cursed. But yes, Mr. Gray, he is perfectly physically well. Arthur reached the table. The light here was dim, provided only by a few low wattage bulbs that gave the stone a shallow yellow complexion. He looked at the glasses. They were beautiful, impossibly thin crystal, the kind that seemed to sing if you looked at it. This was the bottle, the contestant said, gesturing to a dark, heavy bottle standing in a silver coaster, still holding a dark red residue. The 1945 Brunello di Rel from my grandfather's private reserve. It was priceless. We opened it in Mr. Vane's honor. He was writing a retrospective on our vineyard. Was his review expected to be favorable? Arthur asked, not looking at her, his gaze fixed on the line of glasses. He heard her inhale slowly. Marcus Vane was a man who enjoyed his own power. He could make a vineyard or he could break it. One does not invite Mr. Vane hopping for kindness. One invites him praying for mercy. Arthur nodded, a motive or at least the seed of one. He moved down the line of glasses. Each held a faint, drying stain of deep ruby wine at the bottom. He walked past the first, the second, the third. He reached the end of the table. Which glass, he asked softly, was his the fourth one? The Contessa replied from the doorway. He was seated there to my right. Arthur moved back to the fourth glass. He leaned in, his eyes tracing the rim, the bowl, the stem. It was identical to the others. He looked at the wine residue inside. Identical. Tell me about the process, Contessa. The pouring. It is a ritual, she said. Luca is an artist. He presented the bottle. He decanted it. Allowing it to breathe for exactly 1 hour, he poured his own small measure, tasted it, he nodded. He declared it perfect. Then he began to serve. He moved around the table. In what order? He started with Mr. Vane as the guest of honor. Then he proceeded clockwise around the table. Arthur's mind worked smoothly, quietly. The sommelier Luca tasted the wine from the decanter. He is fine. He then poured for Vane. He then poured for 9 other people from the same decanter. Vane drank. The others drank. Vane died. The others are fine. It was impossible. The poison could not have been in the decanter. It could not have been in the bottle. Was the poison? Arthur mused half to himself. In the glass. Impossible, the contestant said, this time with certainty. These glasses are kept locked. They are from the 18th century. They were washed and polished by Luca himself under my supervision before the guests arrived. They were all brought out on the same silver tray. He set them down himself. Arthur Gray stood there absorbing the silence, absorbing the impossibility. The autopsy said natural causes. The logic said murder. The fact said it couldn't be. He leaned closer to the fourth glass, the glass of Marcus Vane. His gaze was not on the liquid, it was on the crystal itself. He circled it, his head tilted. The dim light was frustrating. He took a small silver pen light from his jacket pocket. Its sharp white beam cut through the cellar's gloom. He shined it on the base of the glass. The heavy solid foot of the crystal, it was clear, clean. He moved the light up the stem. And there, just at the point where the delicate stem met the heavy base, he saw it. It was not a smudge. It was not a crack. It was a mark. A tiny, almost invisible etching no larger than the head of a pin. It was not part of the manufacturer's design. It was a symbol, a faint, precise circle with a single horizontal line drawn through its center. He looked at the third glass, nothing. He looked at the fifth, nothing, only Vane's glass. He turned off the pen light, plunging the glass back into the dimness. The symbol meant something. It was a marker, a designation. This glass and only this glass was prepared. He thought of the autopsy. Coronary thrombosis, a heart attack, a poison that mimicked a natural event would be clever, but a poison that caused a natural event that was genius. Something that didn't show up on a tox screen because it wasn't a toxin. It was a catalyst. Something that when mixed with the high tannins of an aged brainaloo and the specific biology of one man would simply stop his heart. A poison that could be applied to a glass, perhaps as a clear, odorless film waiting patiently. A poison that only activated when the wine touched it. A poison that would be completely consumed, leaving no trace. Mr. Gray, the contestant's voice was sharp, pulling him from his thoughts. Have you seen something? Is that a flaw in the crystal? Arthur straightened up, the scent of the cold, dead wine filling his nostrils. No, Contessa, he said softly, turning to face her shadow in the doorway. Not a flaw, I believe it's a signature. Arthur Gray stepped back from the table, the small beam of his pen light clicking off, surrendering the glass once more to the shallow ambient light of the cantina. The silence in the vaulted room seemed to stretch, growing thinner and tighter like a membrane about to break. The contestant, still framed in the stone archway, had not moved. Her posture was rigid, a monolith of aristocratic control, but Arthur could sense the subtle tremor of disc that had entered the air around her. A signature, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. What does that mean? A maker's mark? No, Arthur said, his tone gentle, almost apologetic. He turned to face her, his grey eyes settling on hers. It was added later. It was deliberate. It was a way to identify that specific glass to ensure the right person received it. He did not need to say the rest. The person intended to die. The Contessa's pale skin seemed to lose another shade of color. The implications hung in the cold, damp air between them, heavy with the scent of old wine and wet earth. That is a terrible accusation, Mr. Gray. It is a terrible observation, Contessa. Arthur corrected softly. I'm merely looking at what is here. The autopsy says Mr. Bain's heart stopped. The facts in this room suggest it was given a reason too. He motioned towards the stairs. May I see the rest of the villa and the room where Mr. Vane was staying? She hesitated, her dark eyes searching his face, perhaps for malice or greed or sensationalism. She found only a quiet, persistent exhaustion. It was a look she recognized in her own mirror. Very well, she finally conceded, turning. Follow me. We will leave this place as it is for now. She led him up the spiral stone steps. The transition from the cryptite cold of the cellar to the main floors of the villa was not one of warmth, but of a different, less subterranean chill. The air here was drier, laced with the faint, pleasant scent of beeswax and old wood, but it was just as cold. The Villa Roll was a place built for enduring the searing Tuscan summers. In the grip of a wet, clinging autumn, it held the cold in its very bones. They walked through a long, marbled hallway. Their footsteps echoed, the only sound in the house. Heavy furniture, looming wardrobes, intricate credenzas, high-backed chairs stood like silent shrouded sentinels under fine dust cloths. The Contessa had clearly begun the process of closing parts of the estate down, a slow retreat from the grandiosity of its past. The villa is quiet, Arthur noted. The other guests, she replied, her voice flat. They left, of course, the morning after. No one wishes to stay in a house where such a thing has happened. They were questioned by the police, and they fled back to Rome, to London, to New York. But you have their names, their contact details. Of course, I gave the list to the Caribbean. I will need a copy of that list, Arthur said. It was not a request. She glanced at him, a flicker of the aristocratic fire returning. You are not the police, Mr. Gray. You reminded me of this yourself. No, I am a man hired to find clarity, and clarity is often found in the small details. The names of those who were present is a very small detail indeed. She did not reply, but her silence was an assent. She stopped before a heavy dark wood door at the end of the corridor. This was Mr. Vane's room. It is as he left it. The police, they looked, but briefly once the coroner called, they saw no reason to seal it. She produced an old iron key and turned the lock. The mechanism clicked, a loud, sharp sound in the profound silence. The room was large, with a high frescoed ceiling that was mostly lost in shadow. A massive four-poster bed dominated the space. The air was still. The shutters were drawn, allowing only thin grey bars of light to slice across the floor. Arthur stepped inside. The room was immaculate. The bed was made. The covers turned down but unused. A single suitcase, expensive-looking leather, lay open on a luggage rack. It was neatly packed. As if Vane had not yet settled in, or perhaps was already preparing to leave. Arthur moved toward the writing desk. Here he found the only sign of the man himself. Marcus Vane was a meticulous researcher. Stacks of notepads, several reference books on viticulture, and a portable laptop. Arthur's eyes scanned the books. Titles on soil composition, grape diseases, the chemistry of fermentation. This was not a casual enthusiast. He picked up the top notepad. Vane's handwriting was small, precise, and dense. It was technical, filled with observations about the raw estate. Soil pH in the western vineyard shows significant mineral depletion, needs intervention. Rootstock appears robust, but grafting techniques are dated. Contessa is sentimental, not practical. The 45 Brainalucella notes show a yield of only 300 bottles. This tasting is irregular. Why open it now? Arthur paused on that last line. Irregular. Vane himself had been suspicious of the tasting. He was not just a critic, Arthur mused aloud. He was an auditor. He was a vulture, the contestant said from the doorway, her voice laced with a sudden cold anger. He came here, enjoyed my hospitality, and all the while he was dissecting my family's legacy, measuring its worth in acids and minerals. He saw wine, but he did not see the history, the art. And yet, Arthur said, you opened a priceless bottle for him. The contest's anger deflated, leaving only the weariness behind. The art, as I call it, does not pay for the electricity, Mr. Gray, or for the new rootstock he so clinically observed we needed. We are in difficulty. The vineyard has not been profitable for a decade. Vane's review, if it was stellar, could have attracted new investors. It could have saved us. And if it were Paul she met his gaze, it would have been the end, the final line in a very old book. Here then was the motive. The contestant herself had the most to lose, or perhaps the most to gain if a rival's critique was silenced before it could be written. Arthur turned his attention back to the desk. He saw a small leather-bound personal journal separate from the notes. He did not open it, not yet. Beside it lay a small silver pill box. He flipped the lid. Inside were 3 small white pills, aspirin. He thought of the autopsy, coronary thrombosis. A man who carried aspirin, perhaps for headaches or perhaps for a known minor heart complaint. A complaint that a specific targeted chemical agent could exploit, pushing a minor weakness into a fatal catastrophe. "Where can I find the Sommelier?" Arthur asked, closing the pill box. "Mr. Bay," the Contessa's expression softened, but not with warmth. It was with pity. "Luca, he is not well. He is in his office off the kitchens. He has not spoken to anyone. He believes he served death. He believes he is cursed." "I am very quiet," Arthur said, "and I do not believe in curses." The kitchens were a stark contrast to the rest of the villa. They were modern stainless steel and cold, though from efficiency rather than age. In a small windowless office, barely larger than a pantry, sat Luca Bay. He was a young man, perhaps 30, with the dark, troubled eyes often painted into portraits of martyred saints. He was pale, unshaven, and stared at the wall, a glass of water untouched on the desk before him. He flinched when Arthur entered, the older man's quiet presence seeming as loud as a shout in the small room. "Mr. Bianchi," Arthur began, his voice a low, soothing monotone. He did not sit, but leaned against the doorframe, keeping his distance. "My name is Arthur Gray. I am here on behalf of Mr. Vane's daughter." Luca said nothing. He just stared. "I was in the cantina." Arthur continued, his voice steady, rhythmic. "I looked at the glasses, 10 glasses all in a line." A small strangled sound escaped Luca's throat. "I'm not here to ask you what happened, Luca. I'm here to ask you how it happened, the process. You are a man of process. Are you not an artist?" This seemed to reach him. Luca's gaze slowly shifted from the wall to Arthur. "Process," he whispered. The word was rough from disease. "Tell me about the glasses before the tasting." Luca swallowed. His voice was a dry rasp. "The glasses, they are the royal service, priceless, kept in the locked cabinet in the small cellar. I unlocked it. The contestant was with me. You took them out." "All 10, 11, Luca corrected, his memory sharp despite his trauma. 10 for the guests, 1 for me. Always I checked the wine first. You washed them, they were already clean. I polished them with a linen cloth, my own cloths. I inspect everyone for water spots, for chips, for imperfections." "And did you find any?" Luca's eyes unfocused slightly, replaying the memory. "No, they were perfect. All of them crystal clear as they sing. You know, when you run a damp finger on the rim, they sing. And you set them on the table yourself." "Yes. On the silver tray, I took them down. I set the places. The contestant was there. She was watching. So from the moment they left the locked cabinet to the moment they were placed on the table, no one else touched them." "No one," Luca insisted, his voice gaining a fraction of strength. "Only me. It is my duty." "The mark," Arthur said, his voice dropping even lower, the small circle with the line through it on the base of the 4th glass. Luca frowned. It was the first human non-traumatized expression Arthur had seen on his face. "Mark? What mark? There was no mark. I told you I inspected everyone. I would have seen a mark, an etching, a flaw. No, it would be an insult to the wine, to the glass. They were perfect." Arthur watched him. The man's confusion was genuine. His distress was real. He was either the most accomplished actor Arthur had ever met, or he was telling the absolute unwavering truth. And if he was telling the truth, then the mark was not there when he polished the glasses. "After you placed them," Arthur pressed. "Did you leave the cantina?" "Yes," Luca admitted. "I went to the main cellar to retrieve the 45 to prepare the decanter. I was gone perhaps 10-15 minutes, and the Contessa. She came with me too to unlock the private reserve. It requires her key." Arthur felt a cold, smooth certainty settle over him. So the cantina, the tasting room, was left empty with the 11 glasses polished and perfect sitting on the table for 15 minutes. Luca's face crumpled as the realization struck him. Sigh. Yes, but who would do what? Someone who knew the process, Arthur said more to himself than to Luca. Someone who knew you would be gone. Someone who knew which seat Mr. Vane would be given. Someone who had the mark and its partner. Arthur left the Sommelier to his dawning horror. He walked back through the silent, cold halls, the fog outside the windows pressing against the glass, trying to get in. He returned to Vane's room. The contestant was gone. He was alone. He sat at the desk. the silence of the room wrapping around him like a shroud. He picked up the small leather-bound journal. He opened it. It was not a diary of events. It was a book of thoughts, of quotes, of strange, disconnected observations. Vane's mind was a complex, restless place. Arthur flipped through the pages filled with Vane's tiny, precise script. He found sketches of leaves, chemical equations, and then near the end, a page of idle doodling. His breath caught, not in a gasp, but in a simple cessation of sound. There in the margin of the last page, drawn over and over as if by a restless hand during a long telephone call, was the symbol, a small circle with a single horizontal line drawn through its center. It was not a signature as he had told the Contessa. It was a warning. Vane hadn't been practicing drawing it. He had been documenting it. He had seen it somewhere before the tasting. He had recognized it, and he had perhaps known exactly what it meant. The mark on the glass was not a killer's signature. It was the victim's. Vane had been trying to leave a message. He knew he was drinking from the wrong glass, but he drank it anyway. Why? Arthur Gray looked out the window at the encroaching fog. The question was no longer how the poison was delivered. The question was why Marcus Vane had accepted it. The symbol in the journal hummed with a silent, cold energy. Back theta dollar, the Greek letter theta, a circle bisected. It stared up at Arthur Gray from the page, a simple doodle that now felt as heavy as a tombstone. It was not a killer's signature. It was a victim's observation. Marcus Vane had seen this mark before the tasting. He had recognized it. He had documented it in his most private journal. And then, in the cold, damp cantina, he had been presented with a glass bearing that very same mark. He had looked at it, he had known, and he had consumed its contents. This was no longer a simple question of how. The mechanism was clever, yes. A prepared glass, a 15-minute window of opportunity, a catalyst poison that mimicked a natural event. The true mystery, the one that now settled over Arthur like the fog outside the window, was why would a man meticulous and arrogant knowingly drink from a glass he suspected was meant to kill him? Arthur's gaze drifted from the journal to the laptop. It was sleek, black, and dormant, a digital vault. He touched the trackpad. A password screen illuminated the dim room with a cool white light. He did not try to guess. Vane was a man of precision, not sentiment. His password would not be Rel or Brunello. It would be something complex, something known only to him. He closed the journal, the soft thump of the leather cover echoing in the stillness. He stood and walked to the window, pushing aside the heavy damask curtain. The fog had consumed everything. The cypress trees were gone. The rolling hills were gone. There was only a wall of impenetrable shifting white. The villa felt unmeaded, an island floating in a grey silent sea. The world outside had been erased. This isolation, he thought, was perfect for a murder. It smothered sound. It blurred witnesses. It created a sense of heavy, timeless suspension. He needed the guest list. He needed the name of every person who had breathed that same cellar air, who had watched Vane lift that glass. He left the room, his footsteps quiet on the runner in the long hall. The villa was profoundly silent. He found the Contessa in the library, a vast two-story room where the scent of leather and paper dust was almost as thick as the fog. She was not reading. She was standing before a cavernous cold fireplace, her arms crossed, staring at the empty grate as if she could will a fire into existence. "Contessa," Arthur said. His voice was pitched low, careful not to startle her. She turned slowly. Her face in the dim light of the high-arched windows was a mask of weary composure. "Mr. Gray, have you found the clarity you were looking for?" "I have found more questions," he replied, standing by a large globe that mapped a world long since changed. "I need the list of the guests, and I need to know who else besides yourself and Luca Bay knew the routine of the tasting, who knew the cantina would be left unattended." The Contessa's eyes narrowed, but she did not object. She walked to an ornate dark wood desk. She retrieved a single sheet of paper and held it out. "Guests," she said. Arthur took it. 8 names. He scanned them. Mr. and Mrs. Alastair Finch, London, potential investors, MS. Elena Artova, Berlin, wine critic. Venom Munda, Aris Thorne, Napa Valley, viticulturist. Thorne Vineyards, Mr. and Mrs. Giorgio Duca, Rome, family friends. Mr. Samuel Hann, New York, distributor. Mr. Julian Jubo, Paris, wine historian. And the other matter, Arthur Press, who knew the routine. She let out a long, slow breath. The air misted slightly in front of her. "The routine has been the same for 50 years. My father, my grandfather, they all followed it. Luca is a traditionalist. He would not deviate. So yes, I knew Luca knew." She paused, her gaze dropping back to the empty fireplace. "And Silvio, my estate manager, he would have known. Silvio, where is he? I need to speak with him." A new layer of cold seemed to settle on the Contessa. That is not possible. Silvio is gone. Arthur remained perfectly still. Gone. He left the morning after Marcus died. He said there was a family emergency in Florence. His mother was ill. He packed a bag. He took the morning train. He has not answered his telephone since. The police find this suspicious. The police, she said, her voice dripping with a fine aristocratic disdain, believed Mr. Vane died of a heart attack. They had no reason to find a man's family emergency suspicious. They merely took his name and wished him well. A man with intimate knowledge of the villa's procedures. A man who disappears the moment the victim is dead. Almost too simple, too convenient. This Silvio, Arthur asked. What kind of man is he? The Contessa hesitated. He is local efficient. He has worked here for 10 years. He knows every stone, every pipe, every problem. His problems, did he have any? She turned away, walking back to the cold hearth. I am aware that he had debts. He enjoyed games of chance in the local trattorias. He was perhaps not a wise man with his money, but he was loyal. I thought he was loyal. Loyalty can be expensive, Arthur murmured. Where was his office? Down the hall, past the kitchens, a small room, but he is not there, Mr. Gray. I have told you he is gone. Office, however, may not be. He found it, as she had said, in the service wing of the house. It was a simple, functional room, a stark contrast to the faded grandeur of the rest of the villa. It held a metal desk, a filing cabinet, and a single grime-caked window that looked out onto a small paved courtyard. The room smelled of stale tobacco and anxiety. Arthur did not turn on the light. The grey, diffused light from the window was enough. The desk was tidy, but not clean. A calendar on the wall was marked with paydays and deliveries. He looked at the date of the tasting. There were no markings, but the day before, a single heavy circle in red ink. He saw a local train schedule sitting on the corner of the desk, a booklet for the route from the local station to Florence. His eyes were drawn to a small cheap glass ashtray. It held a single hand-rolled cigarette but crushed out with force. And beside the ashtray, almost invisible on the dark faux wood grain of the desk, was a faint, perfect ring of condensation, a wet stain. It was the exact diameter of the base of a wine glass. Arthur leaned in. The stain was dry, but its outline was clear. Someone had been in this room sitting in the dark with one of the cellar's priceless glasses, a glass taken perhaps for practice or for a final quiet toast before vanishing. He looked at the cigarette butt. The paper was dark, stained with something other than tobacco. It smelled different, not just of acrid smoke, but something sweeter, herbal. He gently picked it up with his handkerchief. He looked back at the calendar, the red circle. The day before the tasting, the day the plan was finalized, Silvio was not just a man with debts. He was a man with a plan. He was the hand that had switched the glass. He was the silent partner. But Arthur wondered, was he the architect or was he merely the tool, and where had he gotten a poison that could fool a coroner? A simple, indebted gambler would not have access to such a sophisticated compound. He was a piece of the puzzle, a crucial one, but he was not the mind behind it. Arthur stood in the silent, cold office, the smell of stale smoke in his nostrils. Silvio was the how. The answer to why was still locked away in Vane's room, inside a black silent laptop. Chapter 4, The Absent Witness. The fog of the morning had coalesced. By afternoon, it had begun to rain. It was not a storm, not a dramatic downpour. It was a quiet, methodical Tuscan rain, a persistent, fine mist that turned the world into a watercolor of gray and faded green. The sound of it was a constant, soft shush against the thick glass of the villa, a rhythmic drumming on the stones of the courtyard outside Silvio's office. It was the only sound. Arthur Gray remained in the small, cold room for a long time. He studied the ring of moisture on the desk, the crushed cigarette, the circled date on the calendar. These were the traces of a frightened man, a man in a hurry, a man who had sat here in this chair, contemplating the act he was about to commit. He ran a finger along the inside of the ashtray, a fine dark residue, not just ash. He scraped a small amount into a fold of his handkerchief and tucked it away. He left the office, securing the door behind him, though he doubted anyone would return. He walked back through the service corridors, the scent of beeswax and old stone returning, masking the sharper, cheaper smells of Silvio's world. He needed to speak to the Contessa again. She was still in the library, but she had moved. She was now seated at the large desk, a ledger open before her, though her pen was still. She was simply staring at the numbers, rows of red and black that told a story of decline. "Contessa," he said, his voice joining the rhythm of the rain. "Tell me about Dr. Aris Thorne." She looked up, her eyes unfocused for a moment, pulling themselves back from the abyss of her finances. Dr. Thorne, the American from Napa. The list describes him as a viticulturist. A rival? Yes, she agreed, a small bitter smile touching her lips. A very successful rival. His vineyards are laboratories. He does not grow wine, Mr. Gray. He manufactures it. All science. No soul was he here. Why would you invite a rival, especially when you seem to despise to a tasting of your most priceless vintage? The contestant sat back, her spine straight. I did not invite him. Marcus Vane requested his presence, insisted upon it. In fact, he said Dr. Thorne was essential to a new venture he was proposing. A collaboration, he said Thorne's science and my legacy could, she faltered, could create the future of wine. Those were his words. Vane and Thorne were partners. I would not say partners, they were collaborators. Vane was brokering a deal. He was the critic, the power. Thorne was the new world money, the science. And I, she said, her hand resting on the ledger. I was the old world name he needed for legitimacy. A biochemist. A man who manufactured wine. A man who perhaps could manufacture other, more precise compounds. This collaboration, Arthur asked, was it a good deal for you? It was a lifeline, Mr. Gray. A very, very distasteful one, but a lifeline nonetheless. Vane was going to save my vineyard by selling its soul to him. So Dr. Thorne had a motive not to kill Vane. Vane was his key to the European market, to the raw legacy. Unless Arthur thought the deal had soured, or unless Vane was not the partner Thorne truly wanted. Perhaps Vane was merely the broker, and with him out of the way, Thorne could deal with a desperate Contessa directly. Where was Dr. Thorne's room, the blue room at the top of the main staircase? Arthur nodded. I will need to see the other guests' rooms as well. They are as they left them, she said, her voice monotone, resigned to his quiet intrusion. The housekeeping staff has not been motivated. He went one by one. The rooms were cold, immaculate, and impersonal. The Finches, the investors from London, had left behind a Financial Times. Ms. Resto, the critic, had left an empty bottle of mineral water. They were ghosts, their presence already scrubbed clean by the villa's oppressive silence. He saved the blue room for last. It was, as promised, at the head of the grand staircase. It was a large, cold room decorated in shades of blue and silver. It felt different from the others. It felt occupied. A suitcase lay open, half-packed. A laptop, much like Vane's, sat on the desk, but it was the small leather dot kit on the bathroom's marble counter that drew his eye. It was unzipped. Inside, among the expensive shaving creams and cologne, was a small amber-colored medicine bottle. The label was in English. It was a prescription. Arthur leaned in to read the fine print. The medication was for a heart condition, a mild arrhythmia prescribed to Dr. Aris Thorne. Arthur stood very still, the sound of the rain filling the silence. A man with a known heart condition, a man who was a biochemist, a man who had sat at the table and watched Marcus Vane die of a heart attack. It was too neat. A man who understood the heart, who understood chemicals. He would know exactly how to trigger a coronary event. He would also know how to avoid one. He left the room untouched. He needed to go back to the beginning. He found Luca, the young sommelier, in the kitchen, wiping down a stainless steel counter that was already spotless. It was a repetitive, mindless motion. Luca, Arthur said, and the man flinched. I am going to the cantina, Arthur said, not unkindly. I need you to come with me. I need you to show me. Exactly. Luca's face went pale, but he nodded. He was a man trapped in the gravity of that moment, and part of him seemed to understand that the only way out was through. They descended the spiral stairs back into the cold subterranean silence. The 11 glasses still stood on the long table, a monument to the perfect, impossible crime. The rain was audible even here. A distant rhythmic whisper. Show me, Arthur said. From the moment you brought the decanter, Luca moved as if in a trance. He picked up an imaginary decanter, his hands shaking slightly. I poured my own glass. Here, he pointed to the single glass at the head of the table. I tasted. It was perfect. The bouquet, violets, and an old leather. Perfect. Then you served the guests. As is tradition, the guest of honor first, Mr. Vane. Luca moved to the 4th chair. He pantomimed, holding the heavy bottle, pouring the dark, priceless liquid into the 4th glass, the one with the mark. Stop, Arthur said. Right there when you served him, did he say anything? Did he do anything? Luca closed his eyes, his mind replaying the scene he had been trying so desperately to erase. He watched me pour. Everyone was silent, the whole room waiting. I finished. I stepped back. Mr. Vane, he did not drink, not at first. He looked at the glass for a long time, just looked at it. The wine or at the glass, I do not know. He just stared. He picked it up. He held it to the light. Luca's voice was trembling. I thought he had seen a floor of sediment. My heart had stopped. I thought I had failed. What happened next? He lowered the glass. He looked not at the wine. He looked around the table at everyone one by one. Then he looked at me. His eyes, they were not angry. They were sad, so sad. Lucas swallowed the memory, sharp and painful, and then he raised his glass. He said to history, and may we all get what we— Lucas's voice broke. He couldn't finish the sentence. Arthur finished it for him, his own voice a low murmur in the cryptic room. May we all get what we deserve was not a toast. It was not a celebration. It was a resignation. It was a judgment. Marcus Vane knew. He knew the glass was poisoned. He knew who was at the table. He recognized the symbol, the back theta dollar for Thanatos. It was a message he understood. He had not been warned. He had been summoned. The question was no longer why he drank. The question was who at that table had the power to make him. Chapter 5, Echoes in the Fog. The rain was relentless. It had found its rhythm and held to it, a metronome for the slow, creeping dread that now filled the villa. Rallo. Arthur Gray sat at the desk in Marcus Vane's room. Fog outside the window was a thick white shroud pressing against the glass, isolating him completely. The only light came from the desk lamp and the cool, expectant glow of the laptop's password screen. He knew the how a marked glass switched by a desperate, indebted estate manager named Silvio, who had then vanished. He knew the why Vane had not drunk by accident. He had drunk by, if not by choice, then by acceptance. His toast was a final, cynical statement. What remained was the motive, the engine behind the act, and that Arthur felt with a cold certainty was locked inside this black machine. He looked at the journal still open beside the laptop, the doodle back theta dollar theta, the symbol Vane had recognized on the glass, the symbol for Thanatos, death. Then it was not a person, it was a concept, a protocol. His eyes moved from the journal to the silver pill box, aspirin for a heart. Looked at the prescription bottle he had seen in Dr. Arist's room, medication for a heart. He looked at the autopsy, death by heart attack. It was all connected, a web of cardiovascular science, of precise chemical knowledge. He placed his fingers on the laptop keys. He did not need to guess. Vane was a meticulous academic man. He was arrogant but not complex. He had seen the symbol. He had recognized it. He had documented it. It was the last thing on his mind. Arthur typed the password, THNATSH, pressed enter. The screen flickered and the desktop opened. Access granted. The machine was as neat and orderly as Vane's notes. Folders were organized by project, by vineyard. The email client was open, but the inbox was mundane. Schedules, tasting notes, travel confirmations. Arthur was not interested in Vane's public life. He was interested in his secrets. He found a folder on the desktop. It was not named. It was marked only with the same simple symbol, back theta dollar. He clicked it. It too was password protected. He typed then Thanatos again. It opened. The folder contained only 3 files. The first was a medical report. Arthur opened it. His eyes scanned the technical data, the cold clinical language. It was a full diagnostic panel for a patient named Sellers Vane. The birth date made him Vane's son. The prognosis at the bottom of the final page was stark. A rare, aggressive, and terminal neurological disorder. The date of death was 6 months ago. Arthur closed the file, the silence of the room deepening. A grieving father, a man who had watched his son die. He opened the second file. It was a TXT file, a simple, unformatted log of communication from an encrypted, untraceable email service. The sender was marked only as admin. The recipient was Vane. The subject line of every message was the same. The Theta Protocol, Arthur Reed. The messages were cold, precise. They were not messages of condolence. They were logistical admin. The subject SV is confirmed. The marker is present. We can proceed. We require your written consent. Vane, he is in pain. Does it work as you promise, admin? The protocol is compassionate. It is painless. It mimics a natural cessation. There is no trace. It is simply sleep. You know the science. You sort us out. Vane, I consent. Gap of several weeks. Then a new message from Vane. This one frantic, angry Vane. It did not work. Not as you said. He suffered. It was not. It was not sleep. You lied. You butchers. You used him. Admin, his case was an anomaly. The compound is sound. We provided a service. Your grief is clouding your judgment. We require your silence. You are compromised. Your involvement is as deep as ours. Vain silence. I'm coming to Italy. I know where you are based. I know who you are. I will not be silent. I will expose you all. I will watch you burn. Admin, that would be unwise. We do not tolerate threats. Marcus, the protocol protects itself. Consider your health. Arthur's blood ran cold. This was not a murder. This was an execution. Vane had been part of a secret, sophisticated, and illegal assisted suicide organization, the Thanatos Protocol, an organization that provided untraceable, chemically induced natural deaths for the terminally ill. Vane's son was a client, a failed one. And Vane, in his grief, was threatening to expose them. He opened the third and final file. It was a research paper, a PDF, Targeted Enzyme Catalysts for Palliative Care, a new frontier in compassionate biochemistry. Author listed at the top of the page was Dr. Aris Thorne. Arthur leaned back, the pieces clicking into place with the slow, heavy finality of a crypt door ceiling. Dr. Aris Thorne, the biochemist, the man with the heart condition. The man whose presence Vane had insisted upon. Vane wasn't bringing him to Italy to broker a wine deal. He was bringing his executioner to him. A final arrogant come-and-get-me Thor was Thanatos, or at least he was its architect. The collaboration was a lie. The tasting was a trap. Thorne, the man with the knowledge, had used Silvio, the man with the debts, to switch the glass. He had marked it with the symbol of their secret society. A final cold message to Vane: "We are here, your time is over." And Vane, seeing the mark, understood. He knew he was trapped. He knew they would not let him leave that room. Perhaps in his grief and his guilt, he no longer wanted to. He was a man who had already lost everything. His toast was not just a resignation. It was his confession. Arthur looked out at the rain. The fog had lifted just enough to reveal the dark skeletal shapes of the cypress trees standing like sentinels in the dying light. The murder was perfect because it was not a murder. It was a protocol. The victim had been a member. The killer had been a guest at the table. And the autopsy had been in its own way completely and terrifyingly correct. Marcus Vane had died of a heart attack. It had just been delivered to him in a priceless 18th century crystal glass. Chapter 6. The Problem of Clarity. The rain had settled into a steady hypnotic drone. It was a sound that seemed to exist inside the room. A low, constant vibration that Arthur Gray could feel in his chest. The laptop screen cast a cool bluish light on his face. He sat for a moment in the deep, profound silence, the weight of Vane's digital confession filling the space. Dr. Aris Thorne, the Thanatos Protocol, Callas Vane, Silvio. The pieces were no longer scattered. They formed a single cold and precise mosaic of calculated death. Arthur's first move was not toward the door. It was one of methodology. He reached into his rumpled linen jacket, his hand passing over the small cloth-wrapped sample from Silvio's ashtray, and retrieved a small silver USB drive. It was one of the few pieces of modern technology he carried, a simple solidate vault. He inserted it into the side of Vane's laptop. The machine, still open, still logged in, accepted it without a sound. His movements were unhurried, his rhythm matching the steady rain outside. He dragged the back $Theta folder, all 3 files, onto the drive. The progress bar was a thin blue line filling up in seconds. He did not stop there. He navigated to the email client. He exported the entire conversation log between Vane and admin. He found the metadata in Vane's sent items, tracing the originating IP of admin's encrypted messages. It was as he expected, masked by a series of relays, but the first node. It was in the Napa Valley. He copied everything. The laptop contained the entirety of the motive. The USB drive now in his hand contained the proof. He ejected the drive, a small icon vanishing from the screen. He closed the folder. He closed the email. He did not log out. He simply closed the laptop's lid, plunging the room back into the gray, dim light of the dying afternoon. The room was once again a silent, cold tomb, its secrets now shared. He slipped the small drive into his trouser pocket, a small, heavy weight of digital justice. He left the room, pulling the door quietly shut. The click of the latch was soft, definitive. He walked the long, cold hallway. The villa was sinking into evening. The fog and the rain had conspired to steal the daylight hours, and the corridors were thick with shadow. He was halfway to the main staircase when he saw her, the Contessa. She was standing at the landing, her hand on the carved new post, staring down into the darkness of the main hall. She seemed smaller than she had that morning, as if the damp air had compressed her. "Contessa," he said softly. She started a sharp, uncharacteristic flinch. She turned her face pale, her eyes wide with a new, sharper fear than he had seen before. "Mr. Gray," her voice was a dry rasp, "that the carabinieri they telephoned from Florence." Arthur asked, though he already knew. The pattern was complete. "Silvio," she whispered the name of betrayal. "They found him his car on the Strada del Vino. The road was wet. It went off into the ravine. He is dead, Mr. Gray." She clutched the post, her knuckles white, said it was an accident, a tragedy, so much tragedy. Arthur stood motionless, letting her words hang in the air. He thought of the ring of moisture on Silvio's desk, the marked calendar, the crushed cigarette. He thought of the man's gambling debts, a perfect lever, a man paid to do a small, simple job. Switch a glass, a job that once done made him a liability. and Dr. Aris did not abide liabilities. Yes, Arthur said, his voice a low, sore echo in the hall. A tragedy. He looked past her up the stairs toward the blue room. The final piece. I must speak with Dr. Thorne, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He is preparing to leave, I believe. She said, distracted by her own grief and fear. He requested his bill be prepared. He is leaving in the morning. I will see him now. He ascended the stairs, his footsteps muffled by the thick runner. The air grew colder as he climbed. The blue room was at the end of the hall, its door a dark rectangle against the faded wallpaper. He knocked a simple, firm rap. There was no sound from within, only the relentless, steady drumming of the rain on the roof and the windows. He knocked again, louder this time. Dr. Thorne, silence. Arthur rested his hand on the brass knob. He turned it. It was unlocked. He pushed the door open. The room was dark. The curtains were drawn, but he could see a figure. Dr. Aris Thorne was standing by the window, a silhouette against the pale grey light. His back was to the door. As Arthur had suspected, 2 suitcases stood by the bed, zipped, locked, and ready. He had been waiting. Dr. Thorne, Arthur said, his voice not rising, not accusing, merely stating. The figure did not turn. Mr. Gray, Thorne's voice replied. It was smooth, calm, with a rich Californian accent. It was the voice of a man with absolute control. I was wondering when you would find your way to me. I heard you speaking with the Contessa. Such a terrible string of bad luck this villa is having. Silvio's luck had helped, Arthur said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. The click of the latch seemed this time to seal them both inside. Thorne turned slowly. He was a man in his late 50s with a tidy graying beard, wire-rimmed glasses, and the unnervingly clear eyes of a true believer. He looked more like a philosophy professor than a biochemist. He looked nothing at all like a killer, a meticulous man. Doctor, you don't like loose ends, a man with gambling debts. He's prone to talk. Thorne smiled. It was a thin, bloodless expression. You are not a policeman, Mr. Gray. You are a consultant. A whisper. You have no authority here. I am not here with authority, Arthur said. Moving to the center of the room, he stood by the empty fireplace, mirroring the Contessa's earlier stance. I am here with clarity. I was in Mr. Vane's room, his laptop. It was very informative. Thorne's smile did not waver, but his eyes, those clear, intelligent eyes, sharpened. They became analytical. He was assessing Arthur, measuring him. A man's private files are just that, private. When they detail a protocol, Arthur said, his voice dropping, matching the rhythm of the rain. A service. Not when they contain a father's grief and an organization's solution. A solution called than the name hung in the air. The room was cold, but the atmosphere had just become glacial. Thorne's smile faded, replaced by a cool academic curiosity. You are more thorough than I anticipated. I presumed Vane's grief had made him careless. It appears I was correct. You wrote the paper, Doctor, targeted enzyme catalysts. A brilliant piece of work. You found a way to weaponize a person's own biology against them. A way to edit them, as you called it. A way to induce a coronary thrombosis that would pass any autopsy. Because it was by all measures perfectly natural, just accelerated. Thorne inclined his head, a small bow of acknowledgement. It is compassionate, Mr. Gray, a gift, an end to suffering that medicine is too cowardly to provide. We offer a dignified, painless exit. It painless for Carla's Vane. Arthur asked, his voice still quiet, but now edged with the cold of the grave. For the first time, a flicker, a disturbance. Thorne's gaze hardened. That was an anomaly, a tragedy. Yes, but the protocol is sound. Vane in his pain was going to destroy years of work. He was going to deny this gift to hundreds, thousands of people, all because of one regrettable outcome. He was selfish. He would not listen to reason. So you brought the protocol to him, insisted I come. Thorne corrected, a trace of arrogance entering his voice. He thought he could. What? Confront me? Expose me here in this crumbling museum? He underestimated me. He underestimated the necessity of my work. He was a problem, Mr. Gray, and I am a scientist. I solve problems. Thorne took a step away from the window toward his packed bags. He was not afraid. He was finalizing a procedure. And now, Thorne said, his voice dropping into that same compassionate tone he must have used with his clients. I'm afraid you have become a problem as well. You have the same sentimentality, the same lack of vision. You see a murder. I see a necessary clinical correction. The threat was absolute. It was not one of violence. It was a statement of fact. Arthur Gray was in an isolated villa, in a foreign country, in a room with a man who could kill him and have it ruled natural causes. The fog outside was a white wall. The rain, a smothering sound. No one would hear, no one would know. Arthur had found his clarity, and it in turn had found him. Chapter 7. The The 11th glass. The silence that followed Dr. Thorne's declaration was profound. It was not an empty silence. It was a heavy, weighted pause filled with the low, steady sound of the rain and the unspoken clinical threat. Thorne saw a problem. Arthur Gray was that problem. Arthur did not move. He did not flinch. His posture remained one of weary observation, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He was a man who had long ago mastered the art of presenting no threat, a gray, unassuming figure. It was his greatest strength. Difficulty with solving problems, Doctor, Arthur said, his voice a quiet murmur in the dim blue room, is that the solutions often create new, more complex problems. Philosophical point, Mr. Gray. I'm a man of science. I deal in absolutes, in data. Thorne gestured to his packed bags, and the data suggests my time here is finished. You are forgetting a data point, Arthur said. The 11th glass. Thorne frowned. The first flicker of genuine, unguarded confusion. The 11 I accounted for 10. Vain the 8 guests. The contest. You miscalculated, Arthur said, allowing a trace of the contest's aristocratic weariness into his own voice. You planned for the guests, but you did not properly plan for the staff. The Sommelier Luca Bay. The Sommelier tasted the wine first. From the decanter, it was clean. He was irrelevant, was not irrelevant. He was the control group, and he is a man of precise, unbreakable habit. A traditionalist, the Contessa called him. Arthur took a slow step away from the fireplace, moving toward the desk. He did not look at Thorne, but at the rain lashing the window pane. You are a scientist, Doctor. You believe in process. You should have studied Luca's process more closely. He didn't just bring the 10 glasses for the guests. He brought 11, 10 for them and 1 for himself. He always tastes first from a separate, identical glass, his own control. I just said, Thorne said, his voice sharpening with impatience. He tasted from the decanter. The poison was in Vane's glass applied during the 15 minutes Silvio had access. Arthur agreed. A clear catalytic film activated by the tannins in the wine. A brilliant delivery system. But you see, Luca, he is a man broken by what he saw. He believes he served death. He believes he is cursed. And when a man is so consumed, he tries to find an answer. He tries to understand why. Thorne was still watching Arthur, his mind clearly working, recalculating. What are you talking about this afternoon? Arthur said, his voice a hypnotic, steady rhythm. I took Luca back down to the cantina. I asked him to walk me through the ritual step by step. He was in distress. He was reliving the moment. He showed me how he served Vane, showed me how Vane hesitated. Arthur turned his head, his gray eyes finally landing on Thor, and then after I left he stayed. He was alone in that cold room with those 11 glasses. He was staring at the glass he had served Vine, the glass you had Silvio mark, and he was comparing it to his own. Thorne's expression did not change, but his stillness was now absolute. He polished them all himself. You see, he knew they were perfect. But after the tasting, after Vane faltered, Luca noticed something. A smudge, he thought an imperfection, the tiny backlash. Eat $1 you used to mark the glass. Wouldn't understand what it meant. Thorne dismissed. No, Arthur agreed, he wouldn't. He would just see an imperfection, a flaw in his perfect ritualistic service. But then he looked at the wine inside the dregs. The wine in Vane's glass looked different from the 10 others, just slightly. A faint, almost imperceptible coagulation, the catalyst reacting with the last drops of the wine as it dried. Is a sommelier, not a chemist. Thorne said he is an artist. His entire life is based on observing the subtle differences in liquid. He saw it, and he saw the same tiny faint mark on the glass. He connected the imperfection on the glass with the imperfection in the wine, and he was terrified. Arthur paused, letting the rain fill the silence. So he did something very simple, very human. He took his own glass, the 11th glass, the one he had tasted from the clean one, and he poured the dregs from Vane's glass into it. A sharp, almost imperceptible intake of breath from Thorne. He wanted to see if the sickness was in the wine or in the glass. He swirled the contents, and of course, nothing happened. The dregs from Vane's glass were now inert, the catalyst long since dissolved and consumed. But the glass, Vane's glass, was now empty, rinsed in effect by its own dregs being poured into another. He's disturbed the evidence, Thorne stated. He's contaminated the scene. He's a fool, as Arthur said, but he didn't stop there. He was still holding his own glass, which now contained the dregs from Vane's, and he put Vane's empty rinsed glass back on the table, and then, because he is a creature of precise obsessive habit, his own glass in his pocket. Thorne's composure finally visibly cracked. His eyes widened. He took it. He didn't know why. A compulsion. He took the glass that held the last of what Marcus Vane had tasted. He carried it upstairs. He has been carrying it with him wrapped in his polishing cloth, a talisman of his guilt, the 11th glass. He has the wine. Thorne's voice was a strained whisper. He has the residue, Arthur corrected, and more importantly, Doctor, you don't. Thorne stared at Arthur. The calculation in his eyes was fast, frantic. He had planned for the body. He had planned for the laptop. He had planned for Silvio. He had not planned for a grieving, obsessive sommelier who stole a glass. This is absurd. He's a grieving boy, as Arthur said, which is why when I left him, I advised him to go to the Caribbean. Not here, the local station, but in Florence. I told him to tell them he was afraid that his employer was dead, the estate manager was dead, and he believed he was in danger. I told him to give them the glass and the cloth and to not speak to anyone else. You did this before you came to me. I'm a quiet man, Doctor, but I'm not a foolish one. Thorne looked at the door, he looked at his bags, he looked at Arthur. The scientist's cold, rational world was fracturing. The problem of Arthur Gray was now insurmountable. That glass proves nothing, Thorne hissed. The smooth, compassionate voice gone, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. It's a contaminated sample moved by a civilian. It's inadmissible. Perhaps, Arthur agreed. His voice still that same maddening calm. But it will be tested. And when it is, it will be tested alongside the sample I took from Silvio's ashtray, which I suspect contains the residue of the catalyst he was handling. And when that is tested, it will be alongside the research paper I downloaded from Vane's laptop. Your paper, Doctor, the one that explains in precise scientific detail exactly how to do it. Arthur took a single step toward the door, his hand now in his pocket, his fingers resting on the small silver USB drive. You are a very tidy man, Dr. Thorne. You solve problems, but you have left residue everywhere. Thorne's face was pale. The hunter had become the prey. The clinical detached scientist was now just a man in a room, his escape route cut off, his perfect crime dissolving like a film in wine. What do you want? Thorne asked, his voice low, guttural. I want what Mr. Vane's daughter wanted, Arthur said, his hand on the doorknob. Clarity and clarity has its own weight. I suspect you will find it inescapable. He opened the door and stepped out into the dark, cold hall, leaving the doctor alone with his packed bags, the sound of the rain, and the dawning, terrible realization that the protocol had finally fatally failed. Chapter 8. The weight of clarity. Arthur Gray did not run, he walked. His pace was the same as it had been when he first arrived at the villa. Measured, unhurried, thoughtful, he descended the grand staircase, his hand brushing the cool, polished wood of the banister. The villa was sinking into a deep, oppressive gloom. The rain had not ceased, its steady percussive sound, a constant companion, drumming against the tall arched windows of the main hall. He saw a light on in the library. The contestant was there still at her desk, but she was no longer looking at the ledger. She was slumped in her chair, her face in her hands, the picture of a dynasty's end. He stood in the doorway for a moment, a grey shadow in a house of shadows. She did not hear him. He was, as he had always been, easily overlooked. He chose not to disturb her. Her grief was its own world, and he was merely a visitor. The truth of Thorne, the truth of Silvio, the truth of Vane that could wait. The carabinieri from Florence would arrive, and they would be far less gentle than he. He walked to the heavy oak door. He let himself out. The cold, damp air hit him immediately. It was sharp, cleansing, and smelled of wet earth and pine. The fog was thick, clinging to the ground, swallowing the beams of the villa's few exterior lights, turning them into hazy, diffused orbs. His small, dark lantern was parked where he had left it, a glistening black shape in the mist. He got into the car. The engine turned over with a quiet, reliable hum. He did not turn on the headlights immediately. He sat for a moment, the USB drive a small, hard shape in his pocket. He looked back at the villa. It loomed from the fog, a sleeping giant, its windows either dark or filled with a pale, sickly light. He thought of Thorne, alone in the blue room, a man of science, a man who believed he was a purveyor of mercy, now trapped by his own meticulous, fatal logic. He thought of Vane, a man of such arrogance and grief that he had walked willingly into his own execution. He thought of Luca, a young man obsessed with perfection, whose one small compulsive act of breaking protocol had unraveled a conspiracy. There would be no clean ending. The Thanatos Protocol was not a single man. It was an organization. Thorne was a high architect, but admin was a system. The USB drive in his pocket was not an end. It was a beginning. It was a key to a much larger, darker room, but that was a problem for another day, for Scotland Yard, for Interpol. His job, the one he had been hired for, was complete. He had found clarity for Marcus Vane's daughter. He turned on the headlights. The beams cut two weak cones into the swirling white fog. He put the car in gear. He drove slowly down the long, winding drive, the cypress trees emerging from the mist like silent, mournful sentinels bowing as he passed. The gravel crunched under his tires, a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the wet, quiet night. He reached the main road, the Strada del Vino. He paused, looking left, then right. The road was empty, a dark, wet ribbon vanishing into the fog in both directions. He turned left toward Florence, toward the station where Luca Bay was hopefully by now telling his story to a confused but beautiful policeman. He thought as he drove about the nature of justice. It was not, he mused, a lightning strike. It was not a grand, dramatic revelation. It was like the rain, a slow, patient, and methodical process. It was the accumulation of small, insignificant details. A marked glass, a dried water ring, a misplaced file, a stolen 11th glass. It was a weight pressing down slowly until the truth, like water, found its way to the surface. The fog began to envelop the car, the world reducing to the small, illuminated circle of the road ahead. Arthur Gray drove on the steady, rhythmic swack of the windshield wipers beating time, a quiet, mechanical heartbeat carrying him away from the villa and toward the distant sleeping city. The case of the Sommelier's secret poison was closed, but the silence it left behind was, he knew, heavier than any stone.